You won't believe what happened when a group of neighbors and their HOA decided they had the power to tell me what I could and couldn't do on land I paid for. All I wanted was something simple, peace and quiet at my lake, and the chance to enjoy a little fishing after long weeks of hard work. But the moment I brought out my fishing pole, the HOA members came running like they owned the place, waving papers, shouting rules, and trying to shame me in front of everyone. They told me fishing wasn't allowed, even though the water touched my own property line. At first, I laughed it off, but deep down I knew this wasn't just about fishing, it was about control. They wanted to remind me that I lived under their thumb, that no matter what, they could tell me what to do. The more they pushed, the clearer it became. This wasn't about rules, it was about power. And I don't play those kinds of games. So instead of fighting with words or endless meetings, I made a move none of them saw coming. I did my homework, made a few calls, and discovered something shocking. The lake wasn't fully owned by the HOA. With the right offer, I could take it off their hands completely. And that's exactly what I did. One signature later, the lake was mine, private property. Suddenly, their rules no longer mattered. But here's where things took a twist. The HOA expected me to bow down, but instead, I invited my friends, family, and neighbors who had been treated unfairly before. We started throwing picnic parties by the water, enjoying the fishing they tried to ban. And just when they thought they had won, I flipped the script. What happened next left them stunned. When I first moved into the neighborhood, I honestly thought the HOA would make life easier. They promised clean streets, organized events, and a community where everyone looked out for each other. But it didn't take long to see their true colors. Rules seemed to change depending on who you were, and certain families always got special treatment while others were constantly targeted. I kept my head down, paid my dues, and focused on building a peaceful space for myself by the lake. That water became my escape, a place where I could breathe away from the noise of work and everyday stress. The lake wasn't just any lake. It was the heart of the neighborhood. Kids grew up learning to swim there, families walked its trails, and for decades it was the quiet pride of our community. But somewhere along the way, the HOA began to treat it like their personal kingdom. They handed out fishing bans, parking restrictions, and even threatened fines for something as small as sitting on the bank with a cooler. It was frustrating, but more than that, it was unfair. What the HOA didn't know was that I had grown up around water. Fishing wasn't just a hobby, it was part of who I was. The calm of the lake reminded me of my childhood, of early mornings casting lines with my dad, waiting in silence for that tug on the reel. When they tried to take that away, it wasn't just about the act of fishing, it felt like they were stripping away something deeply personal. I started noticing others who felt the same way. Neighbors who whispered about fines, about getting letters for things that never used to matter. There was tension bubbling under the surface, and the lake seemed to be the spark. And that's when I realized the fight wasn't just mine anymore. The moment word spread that I had bought the lake, everything in the neighborhood shifted. Some people were thrilled. They finally saw hope against the HOA's endless rules. Others, especially those on the HOA board, acted like I had stolen their crown jewel. Suddenly, I was the center of every whispered conversation at the mailbox and every glare across the street. It wasn't just about fishing anymore. It had become a battle over pride, power, and who really controlled the community. The HOA president in particular seemed determined to make my life difficult. Overnight, I started receiving letters about the height of my grass, the color of my mailbox, even the way my guests parked when they came for the picnics. It was obvious they were trying to pressure me into backing down, but each notice only reminded me why I had taken a stand in the first place. Meanwhile, families who had once kept quiet began approaching me in secret. They told me their stories about being fined for hanging the wrong kind of holiday lights or threatened for leaving a kayak on their porch. It was like the lake had become more than water. It was a symbol of pushing back. But not everyone was on my side. A few neighbors worried that making the lake private would divide the community even more. Some whispered that I was no better than the HOA, that I had taken something that belonged to everyone. That stung, because my whole goal was to bring people together, not drive them apart. Still, I knew the HOA was fanning those flames, twisting the story to suit their narrative. The tension grew by the day, and I could feel a showdown coming. The lake was mine now, But the real battle with the HOA had only just begun. Things really started to boil over after I threw a weekend picnic by the lake. Families brought food, kids played in the water, and for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt alive. But the HOA wasn't happy. They showed up in the middle of the gathering, clipboards in hand, snapping photos like they were building a case against me. People froze, unsure if they should keep laughing and eating or pack up and leave. That's when I realized the HOA wasn't just angry about me fishing, they were terrified of losing control over everyone else. The following week, their attacks escalated. I got another thick envelope in the mail, stuffed with warnings and threats about unauthorized gatherings, property violations, and even safety concerns at the lake. It was laughable, but it also showed how far they were willing to go. At night, I'd notice HOA board members slowly driving past my house, as if they were checking for any excuse to add to their list. The tension was so heavy you could feel it every time you stepped outside. But the harder they pushed, the more support I got. Neighbors who had never spoken to me before started stopping by, offering to help, asking how they could stand up too. Some even suggested organizing a formal petition against the HOA. It was like the lake had opened everyone's eyes to how much power the board had been holding over us. Still, I knew the HOA wasn't going to back down. They were cornered, and people like that only fight harder when they feel threatened. Rumors started swirling about legal action, about new rules they were drafting to hit me where it hurt most. The stage was set for a showdown, and every move felt like it could be the spark that set everything on fire. Just when I thought the battle couldn't get any worse, the HOA pulled a move that caught everyone off guard. They claimed they had discovered an old clause in the community bylaws that supposedly gave them shared authority over the lake. At first, it sounded ridiculous. After all, I had the paperwork, the deed, and every legal document proving the lake was mine. But the way they presented it, with stacks of highlighted documents and a lawyer suddenly showing up at a board meeting, made it clear they weren't bluffing. They were gearing up for a serious fight. The rumors spread like wildfire. Some neighbors panicked, whispering that the HOA might be able to take the lake back. Others grew angry, saying the board was wasting everyone's dues money just to pick a fight with me. Suddenly, the community felt split down the middle. People who had once stood shoulder to shoulder at the picnic started questioning if siding with me was worth the risk of being dragged into a bigger war. As if that wasn't enough, one evening I noticed something strange. The HOA had installed "No Trespassing" signs near the far side of the lake. It was technically still my property, yet they were acting as if they owned part of it. Neighbors called me, confused and frustrated, asking if they were still allowed to fish or bring their kids to play by the water. It was exactly what the HOA wanted, to create doubt, to make me look powerless in front of everyone. That night, staring out across the water, I realized this fight wasn't just about fishing or rules anymore. It had become a battle over truth, ownership, and trust. And if I didn't act fast, the HOA's bold twist might actually turn the tide against me. The tension finally broke on the day of the HOA's emergency meeting. Word had spread that they planned to challenge my ownership of the lake, and the room was packed. Neighbors on one side, the HOA board on the other, and their lawyers sitting stiffly at the front. I walked in with my own stack of papers, the deed, and all the legal documents in plain sight. For weeks, they had pushed rumors and stirred doubt, but now it was time to put everything on the table. The HOA president stood up first, waving their so-called bylaws, and insisting the lake was part of the community property. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but I stayed calm. When it was my turn, I laid out the deed, the county records, and even a letter from the previous owners confirming the sale. The room went silent. You could see the board members' faces drop as the truth settled in. The lake was legally mine, no loopholes, no shared rights. The neighbors erupted, some cheering, others shaking their heads at how far the HOA had gone. It felt like the moment of victory, the point where everything was finally resolved. But just as the meeting seemed ready to close, the unexpected twist hit. One of the quieter board members suddenly stood up and announced they were resigning, revealing that even they were tired of the president's power games. They confessed that fines and rules had been bent for years, and the fight over the lake was just the breaking point. That confession stunned the room. The HOA's unity shattered right in front of everyone, and the neighbors realized change was possible. I had defended the lake, but what really happened that night was bigger. The balance of power in the whole community had shifted, and nothing would ever be the same again. After that meeting, everything started to shift. The resignation from the board member was like pulling the first block from a shaky tower. The rest soon followed. Within weeks, 2 more board members stepped down, and neighbors who had once been silent found the courage to speak up. For the first time in years, people weren't afraid of the HOA's letters or surprise inspections. It felt like a heavy weight had finally lifted off the community. The lake became more than just a piece of property. It turned into a gathering place again. Families came with picnic baskets, kids learned how to fish, and older neighbors brought stories of how the lake used to be before all the restrictions. What started as a fight over fishing had become a reminder of what community was supposed to mean: people sharing space, respecting one another, and enjoying the simple things together. Of course, the HOA still existed, but with new leadership and open conversations, it was no longer the controlling force it once was. The constant battles over mailbox colors or lawn heights started to fade. Instead, neighbors voted on fairer rules, ones that actually made sense and worked for everyone. The trust that had been broken slowly began to rebuild. Looking back, it's almost